This is an Audio Wool original.
Oh, Kelly.
Oh, hi, Byron.
We got something real special for the folks today.
We do.
You had a conversation with a great gentleman.
Unfortunately, you didn't get to talk to this great gentleman about any of the things that he's done that you're interested in.
No, but he was able to provide a perspective around some of the topics that we've covered throughout the years.
Harvey Pratt is really the only reason that David Paulides Hoopa Project ever came into being. Not only did he apply his incredible forensic artistry skills, drawing out what witnesses described, but as a very respected tribal member, he is the only reason that a lot of those witnesses even agreed to participate in the project. So we've talked before about the Hoopa Project being a really significant piece in terms of conveying some Native American perspective on Bigfoot sightings. Harvey's really the brains and the artistry and the heart behind that operation. So that was really cool to hear his perspective.
Absolutely, yeah.
He's a member of a couple different tribes, and so he's got some interesting perspectives on Native experiences with Bigfoot, which, as you know, Byron, I've been itching to hear more about for a very long time.
Now we're going to share that, your interview with Harvey Pratt.
Next time we talk to him, Byron, you can talk to him about the fact that he was involved with investigating the Green River Killer and the BTK Killer and the Oklahoma Girl Scout murders and Henry Lee Lucas and the World Trade Center bombing, because I know you care more about those things than you do about Bigfoot.
I mean, yes. I can't wait to talk to Harvey more, but for now.
Here's
our first conversation with Harvey Pratt.
I hope I've got this correct. You are both an Arapaho and Cherokee tribal member. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm also a quarter Sioux.
Oh my goodness. Okay, wow. So a lot of different cultural traditions coming in there. So yeah, I guess if you can tell us a little bit about what you understood about those creatures maybe growing up and culturally, and then what brought you to becoming involved with them in a more professional capacity.
Yeah, I wanted to start off telling you that an anthropologist by the name of George A. Dorsey, Dorsey, lived with the Cheyennes in the 1880s, and he published a book in 1905 in which the Cheyennes talk about the origin of man and the people that were there first. They said there was three races that they're aware of. The hairy people was one. He moved south and into the mountains. And then there was the white man, and he had hair all over his face and his arms and his legs. And he was with us for a little while, and then he left. And then there's the Indians have just long hair on their head, And when I read that, I thought they probably were talking about Vikings.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That makes sense.
Yeah, I think they were talking about Vikings who came and then left. But the three races were the hairy people. And he said the hairy people had everything that we had, but they moved away. And then we were the brown skins with just hair on our head. And everybody else had hair on their body or on their legs. And so I just thought that was interesting. That was written in 1905, published in a book called The Cheyenne Ceremonial Organizations by George A. Dorsey.
Fascinating.
I thought that was interesting, that was recorded. Native people have talked about him for a long time. Years ago, when people were traveling into a new area and it wasn't their enemy and it wasn't theirs, they would sing trail songs. And the trail song was to let the spirit know, which a lot of the tribes referred to the hairy people as the spirit people, let them know that we're not coming to stay in your area. We're just passing through. So they sing trail songs. Now, they wouldn't do that if they were on a warpath or in enemy country. They wouldn't.
Right.
You hear stories about areas that Indian people, tribes claimed a certain area and stayed there. Then there's a certain area that they didn't go into.
Right.
Because that belonged to the hairy people or the stick people or the boss of the woods or whatever they called them.
So those were all different names.
Yes.
Boss of the Woods, we talked about this, is my favorite. I think that's the best name ever given to a Bigfoot creature.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Exactly. They would trade with them, off and on. They would trade with them, exchange gifts, called gifting. Native people still do that. they gift them, they leave them things, and maybe they'll get something back, just to stay on the good side, because some tribal people say they're demons, and some tribal people will say that you're going to be blessed if you see one.
Now, Harvey, because you've got such a multifaceted tribal background, is that a difference of opinion like within the same tribe, or do different tribes have different perspectives overarchingly?
I think different tribes have different perspectives. And, I heard some Choctaw stories that years ago that the Hairy people helped the Choctaws fight other tribes.
Interesting.
So they were allies. They actually fought together. And then in some cases, when they got into an area that they weren't supposed to be and they started acting like it was theirs, they would be attacked by the Hairy people. And they supposedly warriors. Well, they're huge. They're huge, absolutely huge. And I've heard this several times, that a lot of times when they captured you, for whatever reason, they would cover you in tree sap.
Oh, interesting.
Put it around your eyes, tree sap, which is almost sticky,
Yeah.
And then I heard that Indian people say you can't hardly kill them. They're tough. You can't kill them, not because they're a spirit, but they say that they would put tree sap on their own bodies, and then stick wood or something on them, so they become armored, so they could deflect an arrow. But they said the arrows, you hardly ever could kill one of them. So maybe bark on that tree sap and make a bulletproof vest.
Oh, wow.
And I thought it was interesting. They said that they had everything that we had. We had bulls and dogs, and you hear sometimes that they actually have dogs with them that are with them. I just heard a guy talk the other day that he saw one and it was a dog winning with it.
Oh my gosh.
So they are kind of like this. I always perceive them as good and bad.
Just like us. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You can have good or bad. And I talked to a family several years ago that wanted to keep their location private, but she talked of two different tribes of Bigfoot people. Some that were hairy and black, and some that had less hair on them. You think about why do they have less hair? Is that Indians always said that they had to watch out for their young women because Bigfoot would steal them, would steal their women, and so if they mated, then their child would not be as much.
Right, would have the hair on their heads, but not necessarily as much everywhere else. Yeah.
Yeah, not as much, and the less hairier ones actually carried a club or a weapon. So that would kind of lend to the fact that even though they're powerful, and I've talked to some people that seen them, and they said in there, he's seen them carrying big pieces of lumber, like it's actually a weapon.
Wow.
So that's one of the questions that I ask when I interview people. I don't go out and chase Bigfoot. I chase people that saw Bigfoot.
Right.
And interview them and hear their story about that episode, what happened and what was going on, And I ask, were they carrying a weapon? Were they clothed? Did they have clothes on? Because there's a tribe here in Oklahoma that says that there's a group of them, and they steal clothes from the line.
Oh, wow.
And the little ones would wear them. And I interviewed a woman, she was 50-some years old, and she said when she was a little girl that they lived way out in the country, and her best friend was another little female Bigfoot.
Oh my gosh.
And I want to know how did they communicate? How did they communicate? She said, well, we just knew, so I'm thinking it was telepathically that they communicated.
Wow.
Her little Bigfoot friend would wear T-shirts, big T-shirts from her brother or her daddy or something. So she'd wear the T-shirt because they played together. She said we were 10 or 12 miles out in the country, and I didn't have a lot of people around in our little house. And she said, and so my little friend, one day I said I took her hand and I brought her to the house, and I went in the house with her. She said my mother and my grandmother were piddling around in the house, and she told us, "Mama, this is my friend." kind of didn't pay any attention to her, and she repeated it, and they turned around and looked, and when they saw what she was, the mother and the grandmother ran away, and the little girl ran away, went outside, and ran away.
Oh,
She said that we met the next day, and she told me that we could no longer see one another.
oh,
Now that's a great
man.
story, you
That's an
know.
incredible story.
And she said that that family of Bigfoot would sit on their porch after that happened. You know, when they would, if the family left, and when they come back, they said they would be on the porch, and
Oh my
and
gosh.
they would disappear.
What do you think, and whether based on Cherokee legend or other things that you've heard, what drove them into the mountains? What has made them so reclusive? I mean, obviously, I've got some thoughts, but based on your background, what do you think the answer is?
When I was up in Hoopa, that Hoopa people told me that years ago, Bigfoot would they have a big deer ceremony, a big dance. Bigfoot would come down and participate. The families would come down and dance these ceremonies with them. They said, and they did that for the longest time. And then when the Europeans started coming this way, they backed off. They stayed along the mountains, and they watched and they participated, and but they never would come back down again because the whites were coming in, and they were distrustful. And so I've heard that in many stories. The Cattles have stories like that. They have a big ceremony, that turkey dance ceremony, and they said the spirits come. They said the spirits will come, and that's a big area for Bigfoot. And they stay outside the camp, and they listen to the drum and all those sorts of things, and they enjoy that. And we see the same thing where the Cheyennes have their Sundance here at the tribal headquarters. And we've got 600 buffalo out there.
Wow.
They say the same thing, that he comes down, but he comes through the canyons, and he stays and he listens to the drum, and he likes that singing and the drumming, and he'll come but he won't come in. They actually had a video of one at a grease pit from the casino. So someone took the video, so no one knows where it is at this point. But there's always stories of them, and I've talked to several people out there in that area, live in that area, that see them all the time, and they're different colors. You know, there's black and red and blonde, and so they're and white. Oklahoma has a series of canyons that run kind of western Oklahoma from the south all the way up into Kansas. And some of these canyons are extremely deep. I say extreme. They're not like Grand Canyons, or they're
Right,
a couple of 100 feet deep, and streams in there. And they say they pass through those canyons all the time. So that's what they want. And moving from south to north. And people talk about them. Comanches see some white ones, and I think as you get older, they probably gray up some also. There's a family that I know of, and the young boy is he's functional, but he's not completely 100% functional. But he manages. And I always heard that they like those children like that they'll come around him. And
oh, wow. That's really interesting.
and he said that he mowed lawns out in the country around at the reservation. He mowed the lawns and things like that, and he said that he would see a white one standing in the tree line watching him all the time, watching him. And he lived in this little boy's bedroom was down in the basement, and he had little windows running along and it would tap on the window, and he would come just like that. So
Oh my gosh. Wow.
so you'll hear that they like that innocence, that simple.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah, it seems like less threatening, less polluted by whatever society infuses into people. It's a more pure connection. Probably another reason that I would imagine they're really drawn to some of those really traditional ceremonies, because that's much deeper in their roots as well. Like, they probably remember a lot of those same ceremonies from hundreds of years ago before white man was here, I would imagine.
Yeah, and I think that if they were some were stealing the Indian women a long time ago, and so they're always mindful of their women in certain areas, I guess, in certain areas. And then you always hear that when campers are out, that someone will tap on the canvas.
Yeah.
They did that a long time ago too to the teepees. They would be in 4 or 5 teepees, and sometimes they would come.
Oh, that's fascinating.
So you think, hey, they're still doing that.
Right.
They did that a long time ago, and they're still doing that, tapping on the tents.
You mentioned the Hoopa Reservation and the Hoopa people. Tell us a little bit of background about how you got connected with David Paulides and going up and working on the Hoopa Project and what that entailed.
Well, Dave contacted me. I'm a forensic artist.
Yes.
I'm a police forensic artist. I do witness description drawings. I do cranial facial reconstructions. I do age progressions, and I do soft tissue reconstructions. And so I do, I draw people. If they're missing, say she's 10 years old and it's 10 years later, and they want to know what she looks like now, and I'll do those kind of things.
Right.
Or progressive or retroactive. So I did a lot of that stuff. And Dave was looking for an artist, but he was not getting a lot of cooperation from tribal people. Didn't want to just talk to anybody.
Which makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
And I'm kind of that way. I'm really careful about what I say about certain ceremonies and things. I say, there's no reason for you to know that.
Absolutely.
No reason to tell you something, other than you're just curious.
Right.
And so I'm reluctant to do those kind of things. And so the Indian people, because that's a heavily populated area, they say that the Bigfoot is around there because they have a lot of berries, huge berries, just all along the road. And some of the bushes are 15 feet across and maybe 10 foot high, just huge.
Wow.
All up and down there. And they call, a lot of the tribes say, well, some people call them ridge runners because they run along the ridge of a mountain, and so a lot of berries there, and say, well, they eat a lot of berries. I talked with a young Indian woman that was a nurse, and she was coming home early one morning. She turned off the highway and turned on the road, and it kind of goes up and then it starts to go down. And when her headlights went up like that, shine down, there was a Bigfoot standing there by the road. And she said he took about 2 steps and he jumped completely over that 10-foot high, 20-foot wide of bushes and shrubs. And he just went plumb over them and
oh my gosh,
ran across the meadow, and she disappeared. Wow. And then I interviewed another couple. They were on a ridge driving, and there's a meadow down below them, and they saw a deer come running out from left to right, running out of the tree line, running along the meadow. And all of a sudden, after the deer was probably 20 or 30 yards out of the tree line, Bigfoot came out, and he chased it, and he's catching that deer. Now you can imagine, and he's catching it. So I heard that story, and so I'm down in western Oklahoma, and I'm visiting with some people, and this young man came up to me, and he's a young Cheyenne man, 6'7", he weighs 280 pounds.
Wow.
He said, I'm driving down the road, and he said, and it's almost dusk, and he said, but it's light enough you can see. He said, and all of a sudden, he said, I saw Bigfoot run in front of me and down underneath the bridge. He said, so I just pulled over. He said, I got out. He said, I'm a big boy. He said, I got out, and he said, I walked to the bridge. I looked down, he said, and he's standing there. Bigfoot is standing there. When their eyes met, he said that Bigfoot turned and ran, and he said, and that meadow, that pasture was like 80 acres to 100 acres. And he said he ran that almost 100 acres in just a second or two.
Oh my gosh.
Fast. And that's what we heard, that they were fast. And I had another friend of mine said that he was driving down the road, and he's 6'5" and he weighs almost 300 pounds. And he's driving down the road. He sees one. He's going one direction. The car's coming the other direction. And this thing ran right between them. None of it. He said you could clearly see what it was, but we didn't. He said I didn't stop. His dad said, "Well, why didn't you stop?" He said, "Dad, he's way bigger than me."
Yeah.
So he said not a week later, within that week, he was driving in that same area, which is about 4 miles from my house.
Oh my gosh.
And he's driving down the road and he sees him standing in a tree line again. So you see that, and I was visiting with a nurse that lived in Florida but bought land here in Oklahoma and went out to his land that he bought, and he was filming it, shooting it with his computer, and he's taking pictures of it. He said, and it bracketed, and he didn't know what that meant. He said about 2 months later, he thought, I'll look at those pictures again, and he pulls it up and that brackets. And so he called a friend of his and said, what is going on with this thing? What's going on? He said, recognizing a face. So he went back and he looked at it and he zoomed it a little bit. And he said, there was a little short, hairy dwarf standing there. He said, it just all knotted up with muscle. And I said, really? I said, can you see it? He said, oh yeah. He said, it's standing in a tree line, just watching us. And so I said, can you sit? He wouldn't send it to me. So some people are really reluctant to show that because they don't want people coming around. If I saw one here, I don't know whether I would tell anybody either. I get it all the time. I put stuff out here. I find piles of corn. I thought, where did that pile of corn come from?
Really?
Because there's no cornfields around me. A lot of guys will, if they're hunting, we've got a lot of hogs. If they're hunting, they'll put something out,
right,
grain, corn. But right in the middle of my path, see, I have 120 acres, and I've got 2 streams that run through my property, one east and west and one north and south. Then there's a 40-acre lake about a half a mile east of me. There's a lot of resources, and a lot of wild pigs and a lot of deer here.
So it's a good place for them to be, I would imagine.
Yeah, that's what, and this is a 2 square miles. Actually, it's 2 square miles. School property is one section, and then the bank owns another section, and then there's 2 houses on our section, just mine and my son's. On the far side is some people have bought some property now, but the nearest house to me is my son's, and he's a third of a mile away. And then another third of a mile is another family, and then a half mile is another family. And so there's not a lot of activity out here. So when we first came out here, Gene and I, we hadn't built a house yet. So I put up a teepee. I went down and put up a teepee.
Amazing.
We brought my wife's nephew and her niece. They were just children, small children. They wanted to sleep in a teepee, So we
how
brought,
fun. Yeah.
So I built a little fire in there. We're all laying in there, and then you hear something come running by us, and then it makes that whinny noise. You hear this. Sometimes they'll make that whinny noise.
Yeah.
It was real high, and I thought, oh, that's got to be a screech owl or something. But it came right by the teepee, and at the time I didn't think anything about it. Until I started getting into this research thing, and so Paulides was having a hard time finding an artist that the Indians would accept. So when he found me and he knew that I was a forensic artist, and when he first started contacting me, he just said, I'm interested in hiring you to do a job, and he never would tell me what it was.
Because he was afraid you're going to say no. Yeah.
Yeah. As soon as he told me, I said, hell yeah, I'm in this. I said, yeah, we'll do that. I said, that'd be interesting. Because
awesome.
my idea at that time was that maybe they were great big gorillas, or along those lines, something that was other than human beings. But when I went to Hoopa, and I was doing maybe 5 or 7 drawings a day, they would come to the hotel room, and I always, Gene and I, we burn ceremonial things and purify our where we are, so that and we pray about things coming in here, and I want good things to happen to us, and so we do those things. So we do, when Indian people would start coming in, we did those things with them. We smoked off and did things like that, and that kind of helped them to speak to me, and they knew that they found out that I was a Southern Cheyenne peace chief, and so that kind of helped, and And so they just started.
Helped a ton, I would imagine. That's probably the only reason he got anybody to participate.
Yeah. And then so when I first couple of drawings I did, I thought, holy crap, these look like human beings. These look like us. They were really, they had kind of a real strong features, but they looked more human. I would say, like what you refer to a Neanderthal or something,
Right.
And that was a big shock to me. And then I got some of the drawings that looked like Roger Gimlin's and the Creek that looked like that.
Yeah.
And well, there's different types here, different colors. I did a drawing of a young girl, a young black Bigfoot woman, slender, and she was golden. She had golden hair, and she walked by this lady, and this lady said, it looked at me, but it was like, I don't care. And she said, I think it was sick. I think it was sick. She said, and but she's just slender. So I interviewed another Cheyenne man, and he was in Nebraska. He said, hey, Harvey, he said, I saw one up in Nebraska. He said, and she's kind of pretty. I said, really?
That's amazing. Wow.
Yeah, he said, she's kind of pretty.
Well, and I mean, just listening to your stories, they're everywhere. Like, it's all over the place. But, one of the things I've often wondered is, and again, it feels like Native people have so many more stories, and I completely understand the reluctance to share them and really wanting to keep a lot private. But I would imagine that's probably another reason, if these are fairly intelligent creatures, which it sounds like, it's another reason that they have more encounters with Native peoples, because there's a completely different relationship there.
Yes. Yeah, you're exactly right. There is a different relationship there, and I don't know of any Indian people that want to kill one, and you hear
exactly.
See, and other people want to kill them. I have not encountered any Indian people that want to kill one.
Well, and I think it's just a complete difference in mentality. I feel like so many white people I know that are interested purely from the perspective of, we want to prove it's true. It's about proving fact, right? Like, we want to prove that it's true, or we want to prove it's not true. But when I speak to people who are tribal, I hear a completely different mentality of, there's curiosity and there's wanting to understand them, but it's not about an evidentiary, like, I need to prove to somebody that this is a real thing. It's about understanding who these creatures are and how they're tied to the history of this land.
See, I visited with a Native American. He's a school teacher. He taught school here in Oklahoma City, and then he went home for the weekend, which is 80 miles away. And he said, I just needed to get away. And he said, I just walked out on a property, and it's kind of rolling hills and a lot of trees. And he said, I sat down there, on an old log. He said, and I was getting ready to light a cigarette, sit there and smoke a cigarette and just listen to the birds and the wind in the trees and see if the trees would tell me something. He said, and then I heard something, and I turned, and he said, to my right, he said, and it sloped off. It just dropped way off down to a flat. And he said, all of a sudden, two big males came up. And he said, they are probably 20 yards away from me.
Oh,
when they came,
wow.
He said, and so they walked in front of me. He said, one of them was an older male and one was a big alpha male. He said, he was just massive. And the older one was kind of slender, and they didn't even look at me, he said. And then he said, then there was a juvenile, a young one behind them. And he said, he was real tentative. He had his arms up and was looking out of the corner of his eye and looking at me. And then behind him was a female. And he said, she made every effort to let me know that if you make a move towards my child, you're going to be. He said she actually snarled at him.
Wow.
He said, I didn't move a muscle. I sat there for another 30 minutes. He said, I was just in shock.
Yeah.
He talks about two different males and a female and a juvenile, so I think that those are kind of the stories that you hear that Indians will talk about and that they follow them. He said, a lot of times I had a friend that was in New Mexico, it was the Indian family. They were walking down the power line trail, where the big power lines go through the trees. He said, we were walking in there because it was easy. It was simple. He said, but we could see a whole family of Bigfoots walking parallel with us, but they were in the trees. He said, and they walked with us for an hour, just walked parallel with us. So, and I hear a lot of stories where they're followed, they'll follow you, parallel you, depending on the circumstances, and sometimes it'll be quiet, and sometimes they'll just be breaking all sorts of things, to scare the crap out of you,
Yeah. That's what I was going to ask. Do you think it's because there's a desire to interact, or there's a desire to establish like, hey, this is our area, or
Yeah. Are you just passing through? Are you trying to move in here, or
it's like the trail song?
we're curious about you too, like we're curious about them,
Yeah.
I told you that story, like a young man in Idaho, Indian, they had a gifting place. He said, we would go gift, and they called it the Red Rock. And because it had that lychee on it, was red. And so they would go put gifts there, and Bigfoot would put gifts there, and they exchanged. And finally, this one man said, you know what? He said, I'm going to go over there and take a look at these things. They said, no, don't go over there. That's theirs. That's where they live. Don't go over there. He said, well, I'll go over there. He said, and if they bother me, I'll just shoot one of them. So he got on his horse, and his people saw him ride down that way, and then up on the side of the mountain, and then over into the area that belonged to this Bigfoot group. He didn't come home for 4 or 5 days. He didn't know what happened to him. So some of the men said, we're going to go look for him.
Oh, wow.
So they went, because he told them where he was going to kind of go. And so they went up there, and they followed him. They tried to find him, and they searched the area where he said he was. And then they went out a little bit further, and they found him. And he was covered in tree sap, completely covered in his eyes too, on his eyes where he couldn't open his eyes. And they brought him back to the camp, and they cleaned all that tree sap off of him. And they was talking to him, and he said, and one of them said, well, what's the last thing you remember? And he said, well, I'm riding my horse. He said, and the last thing I remember is seeing my foot. He said, where that it jerked him off his horse. And when he jerked him off his horse, his foot went up like this.
Oh my goodness.
That's the last thing I saw was my foot. And then they covered him with that tree sap, and
Wow.
And you just imagine, it's like glue just sticking you all over your fingers and your eyes. So they covered my face in it. And so then that kind of gives you credibility of how they put that sap on themselves to like armor.
Right.
Armor. So,
Yeah.
See, so some things that you hear and you make an association. And I think that when you're up in the mountains, you have a more robust Bigfoot. Just a bigger, robust. But you come down here, they're slender. They're not as heavy because they're not running up down the mountains, and
Right.
they're not as muscular.
They don't need the strength as much, so they've adapted. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, they're running up down mountains. And that they told me, this one guy told me that he was a little boy, and he's up in one of the cabins, and he's sitting on the commode, and he said up above me, he said there's that window above me is about 9 foot from the floor. And he said an arm came in there and tried to grab, was feeling around for him.
Oh,
and
gosh.
if I remember right, he said that window was about 3 foot wide and about 2 foot tall. And he said the whole arm filled that window up. And he said the inside of the arm here was blue-black, just blue-black. He said, I never saw him, but I started screaming, and he said it left and it ran down. He called it a mine shaft, and had a slough there where they poured water in. And he said he was running down that mountain, and he would grab a tree because he's running so fast. He would grab a tree to slow himself down, and he could just push that tree over. And sometimes when he grabbed one, he would twist it, and it would just tear the tree.
Oh my gosh.
That's how they would slow themselves down, running down those mountains at 45-degree angle. And they just, and you could actually see. So he took me out. He said, I'm going to show you where they do that. And so you could actually see the trees leaning like this, where they push them down to slow themselves down. So I just think there's some credibility, and you think about one of the questions that somebody always says, well, if they're there, how come we don't find their bodies when they die?
Yeah, that's crazy. I was just going to ask you about that.
And I tell you what I think. I think that they're able to move into dimensions. they can travel into different dimensions. So when their time comes, they'll go to the other dimension.
They pass elsewhere. They don't even pass here. That makes sense.
Yeah. So that's what I think. And then I was in Southern California interviewing a guy, and he was saying that he saw two Bigfoots. He said an older one and a younger one. They appeared to be communicating, and then the older one turned and walked away, and he said, and he just dissolved.
Wow.
All of a sudden, he just started going, and he just dissolved. So he said, it's like he walked into a tunnel, some kind of a portal.
The dimensional portal discussion around Bigfoot, I've heard so many different things about it, and I'm really interested, from your tribal background, does that match with some of the beliefs from tribes that you belong to or have been involved with, or is that a different tilt on things?
Well, I don't know if they recognize portals, but there are stories of Indian people that could transport themselves from different places. There are stories.
Okay.
A big medicine man. You say, oh, you can put me in here and cover me up and do all this and, put this rock over this hole. And when they're all waiting for him and he comes up behind them, There's stories about people that are transporting themselves from one spot to another. So I think, well, you know what? That kind of makes sense. That if some medicine men can do those kind of things, why can't they? Because we all say that they're just like us.
Right.
They recognize those things, and when you see things disappear, they talk about these wolf men,
Yeah.
Dogmen.
Yep.
And the southwestern Indians, that say they're demons, they're bad witch people, and you hear stories about. And I've interviewed several people and made drawings of that. I actually saw a photograph from a guy.
Really?
And I wanted him to make me a copy of it, and he just didn't want to do it. He said, no, he said, they're all over here. He said, when I started talking to him, he said, that this Bigfoot, he travels with a lot of people. I said, I thought, well, he's talking about other Bigfoot. He said, no, he said, he travels with some other different people than his people. And so then he described, and I thought he was talking about something with a big nose, but what he was talking about was a creature with a big muzzle, a muzzle like.
Yeah.
And so I started drawing it, because when I started drawing, I made a sketch of a human head, and then I put a nose on him. His nose bigger than that, And so I said, what? He said, no, it's like it's like a wolf. He said, it's got a face like a wolf. They walk disjointed. He said, they walk like they're disjointed. He said, they're almost like they have a drop foot or something. He said, their arms, and he said, their arms are turned kind of backwards. After I did that, then I got a couple of more, and they kind of told me the same thing, and that they had walked funny, and so I'm in Colorado, but I'm interviewing a guy from Texas.
Okay.
He said, I was out looking for arrowheads out there in West Texas. I'm looking for arrowheads, he said, and I'm in these hills, these cliffs, he said, and they're high. He said, maybe 100 foot high. They're big cliffs. I'm down in the bottom of the canyon and looking around. He said, and I'm walking across this meadow, flat area. All of a sudden, he said, looked like a coyote came right out of the cliff. He said, I don't know where he came from. He said, rather than coming toward me, he said, he just came. I said, where'd he come from? I'm thinking. He said, I'm thinking, where'd he come from? He said, and then he said it ran along the ground, and then he said it started kind of wiggling and changing its direction like it was flopping around. He said, and then it stood up on its hind legs. He said, and it looked at me. He said, what I saw was it morphing. He said, it was morphing into something else. He said, it stood up and its eyes just turned black as coals. I got the hell out of there. He said,
oh my gosh.
So you hear those kind of stories of people that what is your reason to tell a story like that to a stranger? And he came to me. He saw that he saw me talking about drawing, and I had some examples, and he came over and he said, hey man, can I tell you a story? I said, sure. So he told.
Wow.
So I made a drawing with him. I've got a drawing of it. He said it actually stood up on its hind legs and started to grow.
So, and forgive me because I'm sure that this is the wrong terminology, but the word that it associates in my head from stories I've heard is skinwalker. Is that,
Yeah.
does that, okay. I mean,
Yeah, I think that the southwestern tribes, they call them skinwalkers, and they think that they're witches. They're able to shapeshift, and things like that, and get half man, and they can cause evil things to you, and now you go east, and people are saying Dogman.
right.
You've heard that, right?
Yeah.
Dogman, and then skinwalkers.
West Virginia and those areas, I know I've heard, but it sounds like the Dogman has at least a more malevolent tone to it, whether that's just a misunderstanding or not, but compared to Bigfoot.
Well, when you hear tribe, my mother used to say when I was working undercover, she said, "Don't let them get your hair."
Oh,
They'll witch you.
interesting.
So now you think about that, and Dogman, and like I said, the guy showed me a photograph. You had to look at it. You had to look close because he's in the vegetation, and I saw it, and he said, "There's another one with it," and I never could see it.
Oh, wow.
I could see the one, and but I couldn't see the second one, and
Wow.
I sure wished I'd have gotten that photograph, and I wished I'd have gotten that photograph from the one in that was living in Florida. That saw the little muscled up dwarf.
Yeah.
But I think listening to various people and tribal people and how they feel about them, and after I thought about it in this secluded area, and then I found out that a guy saw one 4 miles from me,
From you, yeah.
from my house, and so. But I've always put things out. My wife and I have always put things out. We call it feeding the spirits.
You probably have interacted with them in some respect, but just haven't necessarily seen them.
Well, I say I haven't, but about 6 months ago, I was in an area where we see them all the time, and it's nighttime, and I'm driving down, and I took an old country road rather than the highway. I cut across because it's shorter. I'd have to go 4 miles this way and then back this way. And if I cut across, I'm only doing 2 miles, 3 miles rather than 8.
Right.
So I just cut across, and it's dark, and I'm driving along, and I'm coming up to a hill in my headlights, and I see something just on the other side of the hill that is moving right to left, going north. And I thought, oh man, I said, there's a drunk out here. That was my first thought. There's a drunk out here. And there's nothing around. And I see it, and when I come down the hill, it's gone. I thought, so I kind of looked around, say, what is this? Where's this guy? Where'd he go? Because I thought he was just a drunk walking down that road, down the middle of the road. So I slowed way down because I didn't, I didn't top the hill and hit somebody. So I called my wife, and I told her. She said, "Go back and look. Go back and look."
That's exactly what I'd say too.
Well, I kind of went back, and kind of looked around, and I said, man, but I know it's right here. I said, it had to be huge. What I saw was like this angle, rather than see.
Yeah.
See, so it didn't look like when you think about seeing Bigfoot, you think about seeing a great big. But what I saw was a profile.
Right.
I saw that, and the shoulder, and he looked narrow. He didn't look real big. That's when I thought, well, that's a drunk out here walking down the road. And so I think maybe I did see one, but I can't be sure.
Right. In terms of the work you did with Paulides and that incredible Hoopa project, do you guys collaborate on anything still? Like, are you working on any future stuff, or is this more just like a personal passion thing of yours that you continue to investigate?
Dave got me interested in it, to a certain degree, because he threw me into that mix, where I got to talk to a lot of people, and it was so interesting and stimulating, that I really, and I'm since I'm a forensic artist, and when I interview, my interviews take longer than it does for me to draw somebody. I talk to you about certain things, and try to stimulate your recall and make you work at it a little bit, rather than say, "Oh, he was 20 to 30."
Right.
I let you say that.
Right.
You have to pick an age. you know, and I don't say, oh, he had brown hair. What kind of brown hair? Light brown hair, dark brown hair. How thick was it? Had a thick head. So you make them think about it. Just don't let them tell you, oh, he's a white guy. Well, what kind of white guy? What kind of Indian? What kind of black guy?
Right.
You make them answer those kind of questions.
And you basically used all those same strategies when you were interviewing about their experiences. So what's so funny to me is most people mainstream wouldn't give a second thought to, well, like, of course that forensic, drawing and the artistry is evidence and helpful, and that helps us solve crimes. But suddenly when the exact same thing is applied to Bigfoot, it's so much harder for people to believe, which I think is just crazy, right?
Right. Yeah. I asked about clothing, sex, if you could tell what sex they were, how tall were they, what do you think they weighed, what color are they, how much hair, I make you have to, well, let me think about that, rather than just say I was a hairy guy, I make them, I make you have to work for it.
And for you, tell me just emotionally the difference between, because I look at the work you did in your career and I can't imagine the stress and emotional trauma that comes with so much of what you did and were really so good at. And then using those same skills to work on something like understanding Bigfoot stories. Was that almost like an emotional break for you, a way to use those same skills in a way that wasn't quite as dark, or was there really much of a difference?
It did. I don't think it made that much difference to me because I was, I've done over 5,000 cases just on witness description drawings,
Wow.
just on, and the soft tissue reconstruction. I did 2,000 of those. That's a technique. That's when we find a body and we don't know who they are, but they had bullet holes in them, or they've been shot or beaten, or and I repair them, open up their eyes, and take all the wounds off, and fix their hair, and
wow.
And then the cranial facial reconstructions is a technique that's been around for a while, but it started here in Oklahoma by two good friends of mine that were older than me, but they kind of trained me. They showed me, got me interested in that. So the interviews I think are so extremely important. I want to know the weather. What was the weather like? What time of day was it? Was it overcast? Was it cloudy? Was it clear? You ask all those kind of questions to get a picture, because there's a lot of people that are a lot better artists than I am, but you tell me something, I see it.
Right.
I visualize it. I can visualize it. A lot of good artists, they have to look at something to draw it.
Mm-hmm.
You can tell me something and I see it in my mind.
Wow. Wow. So when you heard these stories, did you ever encounter people where you felt like, okay, this guy's totally making this up? Or did you feel like pretty much every time somebody came to you, it was something they had actually experienced?
I think for the most part, I didn't get the feeling that somebody was just full of it. For the most part, I felt like they were being pretty genuine. I interviewed a police officer that he was a non-native, but he was a police officer, and him and his wife were on a weekend vacation, and they were in an area, a tourist area, like a nice park, a big park, and they're walking down a creek, on the side of a creek where's a little trail, and they're walking along, and it makes a turn, and when it turns, his wife grabbed him, peeked down, then he went, they both looked on that, and they saw Bigfoot way down the trail, standing there.
Oh my gosh.
And when they realized what it was, she said, we were about 30 minutes from our car. And he said, and she beat me back to the car. He said, we're running down that trail, and he paralleled us. And he said he was just crashing through stuff and chased us all the way back to our car. She said, we went back the next day. And we went down there, and my husband stood where he was. And she said, we could see about from the waist up, because he was in the vegetation. Mm-hmm. And my husband went down and looked, and they took a photograph, and went down and looked. She said, you could barely see his head. So that thing,
oh my gosh,
that thing had to be 10 foot tall.
Wow.
I asked the husband, I said, were you armed? Harvey, he said, that wouldn't have made any damn difference.
Yeah, that's the thing that I think it makes me sick, because I hear it so frequently. People saying, "Oh, well, if we could just shoot one and kill one, then we'd have evidence." And beyond the fact that it's just crazy to think about another living creature that's obviously very self-aware in that way, it's all these stories seem like it's really foolish to think that that would even be feasible.
You know, I'll tell you one more story. I went down with these guys. They were all Bigfoot enthusiasts. They all had expertise about certain things, cameras, sounds, heat-seeking devices. That could see the heat-seeking. They were in an area that's really, really populated with Bigfoot, and so they were all out there looking. And he said, we turned on that heat. That heat, you could just see things all over there. He said you could just, and they were just moving all around. And they thought, well, what is that? Is that deer or what the hell is that? So a couple of the guys went down there towards that area. And he said it was 25 images. And they got down there, they could see them, they could see their guy, and he's bigger than these other ones. Those little things were just running all around. When they would run around, and one guy said he got slapped on the leg like that. They figured out that they were juveniles, children, little ones. Oh, he said it was. I said, "You're saying there's 25 babies?" I said, "How many parents are there? If you got 20
Right.
babies,
Oh my gosh.
so nobody sees them." I'm telling you that what do they call them? It's not a flare. It's a, but it there's a hot image. It shows up.
Yep. Yep.
25 of those showed up, and he said they were just running all over the place, just like little kids playing. And they got down there, and the guy said, "Man, they'd run by and slap you on the leg."
That's amazing. Oh, wow.
So I think, man, if there's 25 babies, and you're talking about 12 adults, a minimum,
Yeah.
or more than that.
Yeah, because you don't hear about them having I mean, the stories at least that I've heard, it's not like they have 10 kids. It sounds like they typically have one or two, it's smaller family units.
Yeah, there's a couple of, so you get, if everyone that they saw, 25, and they both had parents, that's 50.
Wow.
That's 75 critters running around out there.
Yeah.
4 or 5 of them guys, they swear to it,
That's
So
incredible.
just, crazy.
So cool. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. How come we don't? Because I think that they're able to move into a different dimension.
Well, and clearly they don't want to be seen other than, sometimes. And again, I think probably those instances happen a lot more with tribal members than they do with white people for obvious reasons. But they don't want to be seen. And if they're that smart, heck, if humans are trying to hide, they can hide from a lot of things.
Yeah. How come we don't pick them up on cameras? Well, maybe they can. I talked to a guy, and he was a white guy, but he said he saw one, and they shot a strobe at it, trying to. He said he reached up and tried to grab that light. He said you could see him doing it. So I don't know. I just I used to say I'd like to see one, but I'd like to see him at about 200 yards. Yeah.
A nice, safe, comfortable distance. Yeah.
And in my car,
Yep. Yep.
Anymore, I think I would really like to see one. And I talked to I was at Hoopa. I interviewed a little lady up there. She was a ex-superintendent of the school, and she lived up there in the Hoopa Project. She's got a little wire fence around her house.
Mm-hmm.
And she heard a bunch of noise out there, and she said, "Oh, the damn bears are in my trash can again." So she went out there and turned the light on. She's got a motion detector out there in her where her car is.
Yeah.
And she walks out to the fence, and she says, "I'm standing there looking around." And I thought, what is with you people? You all go, you hear there's a bear out there, and you all walk out there to see it. We'll go out and look for the bear. Oh yeah, it's in my trash can. So she walks down there, and she's looking around, and all of a sudden her light comes on in her driveway. She's about 4 foot from her fence. And she's standing, and she's about 5 foot tall. And she said, all of a sudden, he came out of the shadows, and he came right up to the fence, right to her. I said, "Oh my God, what?" I said, why did you do that? She said, "Hey, I'm 87 years old. I want to see him."
Good for her. Oh, that's great.
I want to see him. And then she said, "You want something to eat? You want something to eat?" She said, wait a minute. Wait, I shall be right back. She went in the house and got a half a loaf of bread, put some bread in there and put some apples in it. Went out there thinking he's still standing there, and he's gone. So she ties it on her fence and goes back in the house. The light goes out. She's sitting there, and, you know, pretty soon the light comes on again. By the time she gets up and gets to the front door and down the porch, and it's gone again. But her food is gone.
Oh, how cool.
I said, my God, I said, why did you do that? Hey, I'm 87 years old. She said, I want to see what he looks like. I thought that was pretty cool.
That is really cool. That is really, really cool.
And then a whole yard full of kids playing, and they start hollering for their mother. It almost gets panicky, you know. So she steps out on the porch and she said, what? And all the kids turn and they point. There's a little Bigfoot baby standing there eating berries, watching these kids play.
Oh.
And when it realizes that all of these people are looking at it, she said it just slowly turns and walks away and goes up the hill. And there's another house living up the hill road about a quarter mile. He had a drawer, like a bureau drawer, mm-hmm. and had a cloth in there, and he had a bunch of puppies in there, little puppies. He said that he went there, and the whole thing was gone. He said, I've got 6 puppies, and my box is gone. Everything's gone. They speculate that little girl took those puppies with her. See, now I'm going to tell you about, they see them with puppies, right?
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. That's where the dogs are coming from.
About 2 or 3 days later, they come back and that box is there and all the puppies are dead.
Oh.
Well, because she couldn't feed them, didn't know how to feed them.
Right. She didn't understand.
So she brought them back and put them back on the porch.
Oh my gosh.
So you hear stories like that, and I hear the same thing from Oregon and Washington and Idaho and California, and I hear the same thing down here. You can see the connection. There's the same kind of stories, you know, about the music and leaving things. And, you know, a lot of people say, how does this guy get around? I said, it's not just one guy.
Right. No, it's a lot more than that.
Yeah. If you think about that, there's 25 babies running around.
Yep.
With each one of them's got 2 parents. I said,
yeah, the numbers are
all in these mountains of eastern Oklahoma. Yeah, I'm constantly hearing some really good stories, you know, from people. In fact, sometimes I have to be primed to remember what I've heard so many and talked to so many people. But it's been a great experience. I've had a good time. I've talked to a lot of Indians will just call me up and say, "Hey, Harvey, I'm gonna tell you something. I saw this Bigfoot. He's carrying his clothes." Great.
So do you have all these stories recorded anywhere? Like, do you write them down? Do you have a big collection?
I did, but someone asked me to look for some. I said, I've got so much crap in this house. I said, it'd take me ever to find something because I've got stacks of boxes of stuff everywhere.
Yeah.
You know? I got Vietnam stuff. I got Marine Corps stuff. I got police stuff. I got artwork, you know, and
yep.
You know, and all of a sudden I'll stumble on something. Oh, hell, there it is. I've been looking for that.
Well, man, at some point, I mean, they're just, it's so cool to hear, like you said, the common threads, but also just to hear the differences and realize they are just like us. They're mean ones and nice ones and good ones and bad ones. And it makes so much more sense than trying to create them into this weird kind of beast that makes no sense to us. They're a lot like us.
You know, Dave is doing this missing stuff, you know, missing people and children, and they find some kids that have been killed or died out there, and then they find some kid that's been missing for 3 days, and they find them 12 miles away at a different elevation, and they say, well, how'd you get here? Oh, a big bear got me, you know, I slept with a big bear, you know.
Yep. You know, it's funny. We have a little kid's book. I think it's called like Jacob and the Bigfoot or something like that. Joshua and the Bigfoot. That's what it is. And it's a illustrated kid's book, but it's that story essentially where he disappears from his parents' campsite and Bigfoot helps him out and eventually gets him back to where he needs to be. And it's funny because my little girls will read it and it's just like the stories you hear from Dave's stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Harvey, I know we've already taken so much of your time. In fact, Byron had another appointment and he just texted me. He said, keep talking. This is so great. But he ducked away. So I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to speak with us. And I know you've got a lot on your plate, but at some point in the future, I know Byron was just chomping at the bit to pick your brain about some of the cases, the forensic cases that you've done, because that's really where his high interest lies. We did a report, he did a short report, about 6 months ago on the Oklahoma Girl Scout case. And he was looking when we were going through your stuff. He goes, "Oh my gosh, Kelly, he was involved in that." I was like, "Byron, he was involved in everything."
This is, all dealing with Indians,
Yeah.
the Indian suspect and things like that, So
Yeah.
I got to work a lot of those kind of cases because I am a native and I understand the culture, and I see how things are done, how people react to certain things and why they do certain things. So
Right. We so appreciate it. And like I said, hopefully we can pick your brain again sometime soon between your travels and all the other amazing things you've got going on.
all right, sounds good.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Harvey. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to an Audio Wool original, produced by Byron McCoy, theme music provided by Cemeteries. For more programs like this, visit audiowool.co.